Imagine that you live in the most powerful empire on Earth, an empire whose roads stretch across continents, whose armies guard distant frontiers, and whose influence reaches nearly every corner of the known world. Marble temples rise above crowded streets. Merchants unload exotic goods from ships arriving from distant lands, and emperors command the loyalty of millions. To most people, Rome appears unstoppable, a civilization built on strength, discipline, and wealth. Yet behind every magnificent building, every military campaign, every public bath, every aqueduct, and every paved road lies a simple reality that few people enjoy discussing. None of it is free. Every stone, every soldier, every official, and every project requires money. Vast amounts of money, and that money must come from somewhere. Tonight, you are one of the men responsible for making sure it does. You are a Roman tax collector, and before the day is over, countless people will wish you had never arrived. Long before sunrise, while much of the city remains asleep beneath the darkness, you are already awake. A small oil lamp flickers beside stacks of wax tablets and financial records. The room is quiet except for the faint scratching of your stylus as you review names, debts, and obligations. Some citizens owe payments from previous months. Others must be assessed based on recent trade activity. Every figure must be accurate because mistakes create problems that eventually return to you. Outside, Rome slowly begins to stir. Bakers prepare bread. Laborers gather tools. Merchants arrange goods for sale. Yet while ordinary people prepare to earn money, your task is ensuring that Rome receives its share. By the time the first rays of sunlight touch the rooftops, you are already preparing for another exhausting day. Unlike soldiers who earn respect through visible service or politicians who attract attention through speeches, your work brings little admiration. Most citizens do not view you as a fellow Roman performing a necessary duty. They see you as a burden. When your horse appears along a dusty road leading toward a village, conversations often stop. Farmers exchange worried looks. Shopkeepers suddenly become less cheerful. Some people politely greet you while secretly calculating how much money they might lose. Others barely hide their resentment. Over time, you become accustomed to these reactions. Yet, even after years in the profession, the constant hostility never becomes entirely pleasant. The marketplace is usually your first destination. It is here that much of Rome's economic life unfolds. Merchants display fabrics from Egypt, spices from the East, wine from Italy, and countless other goods flowing through the empire's vast trade networks. To ordinary visitors, the market seems lively and exciting. To you, it resembles an endless puzzle. Every transaction potentially affects taxation. Every merchant maintains records that must be reviewed. Every shipment creates new calculations. Some traders cooperate willingly. Others treat every interaction as a battle. Many spend enormous effort trying to reduce what they owe. Hidden profits, altered accounts, secret agreements, and carefully concealed merchandise are common challenges. Tax collection often feels less like administration and more like detective work. One merchant insists that recent sales were disappointing despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Another claims that valuable goods were damaged during transport. A third presents records so perfectly organized that they immediately seem suspicious. You spend hours comparing documents, questioning claims, and searching for inconsistencies. Every decision carries risk. Trust someone too easily and you may be accused of negligence. Challenge someone unfairly and you create enemies who may remember the insult for years. By midday, the heat becomes oppressive. Dust drifts through crowded streets while merchants continue bargaining with customers. Yet your work is far from finished. Payments must be collected, disputes resolved, and records updated. Throughout the day, citizens approach carrying coins they would rather keep. Some remain polite, others complain openly. A few become angry enough to attract attention from everyone nearby. You learn to remain calm. Losing your temper rarely improves situations. Still, there are moments when the endless criticism becomes exhausting. No matter how honestly you perform your duties, most people assume you are profiting from their hardship. Stories of corrupt collectors have damaged the reputation of the entire profession. Some of those stories are true. Certain tax collectors exploit their authority to become wealthy. They demand excessive payments, manipulate records, and enrich themselves at the expense of ordinary citizens. Such individuals exist, and their actions ensure that every collector inherits the public's distrust. Even if you follow the rules carefully, many citizens assume you are no different. The farmers are often the hardest people to face. Merchants can sometimes absorb financial losses, but farmers live much closer to uncertainty. A drought, disease, flood, or poor harvest can transform a manageable tax into a serious burden. When you travel into rural areas, you encounter realities rarely discussed inside government offices. You meet families struggling to survive after difficult seasons. You see fields that produced far less than expected. You hear stories of livestock lost to illness and crops ruined by weather. Standing before such people while discussing taxes is never comfortable. Rome expects payment regardless of circumstances. The empire's needs do not disappear because an individual family suffered misfortune. Yet you remain human, looking into the eyes of worried parents while demanding money for the state creates a kind of discomfort that never entirely fades. Ironically, the people above you often create as many problems as the people below you. Provincial governors demand results. Wealthy elites expect favorable treatment. Influential citizens sometimes attempt to avoid payments entirely by relying on political connections. Navigating these pressures requires constant caution. Refuse the request of a powerful man and your career may suffer. Grant special treatment and accusations of corruption quickly follow. Every decision feels dangerous. Every choice creates consequences. As the sun begins sinking toward the horizon, ordinary citizens gradually return home. Merchants close their stalls. Farmers finish their work. Families gather for evening meals. Yet your responsibilities continue. Coins collected throughout the day must be counted. Records must be verified. Ledgers require updating. Reports must be prepared for officials who will scrutinize every number. Long after darkness settles across the city, you remain seated beneath the glow of oil lamps, surrounded by endless columns of figures. Sometimes the work feels overwhelming. The empire seems impossibly large. Its financial needs never end. There is always another payment to collect, another dispute to resolve, another report to complete. Yet during these quiet hours, you occasionally reflect upon the larger purpose behind your efforts. The taxes you collect help fund roads connecting distant provinces. They support soldiers defending borders hundreds of miles away. They maintain aqueducts bringing water into cities and finance public works benefiting millions of citizens. Without revenue, Rome's greatness would quickly begin to crumble. Most people never think about this when they hand over their money. They see only the immediate loss. You see the broader system. Still, understanding its importance does not make your daily life easier. Tomorrow, you will wake before sunrise once again. You will mount your horse and you arrive at the tax office before dawn, long before most of Rome has awakened. The streets outside are quiet except for the distant sound of a baker preparing his ovens and the occasional cart rattling across the stone roads. Inside the office, the air smells of lamp oil, wax tablets, papyrus, and dust. Stacks of financial records cover wooden tables from one end of the room to the other. Names, debts, payments, land assessments, trade reports, and property records are piled so high that it sometimes feels as though the entire empire exists only as numbers written on parchment. Before the sun has even risen, your day is already filled with responsibilities. Contrary to what many people imagine, being a Roman tax collector involves far more than collecting coins. Most of your time is spent reading, calculating, recording, verifying, and investigating. Every farmer, merchant, craftsman, warehouse owner, and trader must be accounted for. Every payment must be documented. Every missing coin eventually becomes someone's problem, and that someone is often you. As the first rays of sunlight creep through the windows, assistants begin arriving carrying fresh reports from nearby markets and districts. The office gradually fills with activity. Styluses scratch across wax tablets. Messengers deliver notices. Clerks organize records. While soldiers prepare for battle and politicians prepare speeches, you prepare for another day of ensuring that Rome receives the revenue it believes it is owed. By mid-morning, you leave the office and make your way toward one of the city's busiest marketplaces. The streets are now crowded with merchants, customers, laborers, animals, and travelers from distant provinces. Colorful fabrics hang from stalls. Exotic spices fill the air with unfamiliar scents. Traders shout prices while customers negotiate fiercely. To ordinary citizens, the marketplace represents opportunity and profit. To you, it represents work. Every transaction potentially affects taxation. Every shipment must be accounted for. Every merchant's records require scrutiny. Years in this profession have taught you that people become surprisingly inventive when money is involved. Some merchants hide goods before inspections. Others alter records. Some conduct private transactions after sunset, hoping to avoid attention. As you move through the market, reactions vary. A few merchants greet you politely. Others suddenly become nervous. Some attempt friendly conversation, hoping charm might influence your decisions. One trader immediately begins explaining why business has been terrible before you have even asked a question. Another quietly disappears into the crowd the moment he notices your approach. You have seen all of these tactics before. Most people assume tax collectors enjoy creating discomfort. The truth is that you would much rather complete your work quickly and return home. Unfortunately, your responsibilities rarely allow for simplicity. At one stall, a merchant selling imported spices presents records claiming unusually low profits. Yet the expensive goods displayed before you tell a different story. You spend nearly an hour reviewing his accounts while customers watch impatiently nearby. As questions continue, inconsistencies begin to appear. Certain shipments listed elsewhere are missing from his records. Payments that should exist somehow do not. The merchant grows increasingly frustrated. Eventually, a revised assessment becomes unavoidable. He leaves angry, muttering complaints beneath his breath. Nearby traders observe carefully, perhaps wondering whether their own records could survive similar scrutiny. Encounters like this occur almost every day. Rarely does anyone thank you for finding additional revenue owed to Rome. As the afternoon heat settles over the city, your work becomes even more exhausting. Sweat forms beneath your tunic while dust drifts through crowded streets. Yet the flow of citizens never stops. Merchants seek clarifications. Property owners dispute assessments. Traders request exemptions. Some arrive with genuine concerns. Others arrive hoping to manipulate the system in their favor. One of the most difficult aspects of your profession is that everyone believes their situation deserves special consideration. To them, their problems are unique. To you, they are variations of conversations you have already had hundreds of times. Later in the day, a farmer from a nearby village arrives carrying a small pouch of coins. Unlike the merchants, he does not attempt deception. His difficulty is far simpler. He genuinely cannot afford the full amount owed. Drought damaged part of his harvest. Several animals died during the winter. The remaining crops produced less than expected. As he explains his situation, exhaustion is visible in every line of his face. You have heard stories like this throughout your career. Some are exaggerated. Many are not. Looking at the man, you suspect he is telling the truth. Yet truth does not eliminate obligations. Rome still requires revenue. Roads must be maintained. Soldiers must be paid. Aqueducts must function. The empire rarely adjusts its expectations because individual citizens suffer hardship. This is the part of the profession that outsiders rarely understand. Citizens imagine tax collectors as cold men obsessed with numbers. In reality, the job often forces you into situations where every available choice feels unpleasant. If you strictly enforce the law, struggling families suffer. If you become too lenient, your superiors begin asking questions. Every decision carries consequences. As evening approaches, merchants begin closing their stalls and returning home. The marketplace gradually empties, yet your workday remains unfinished. Returning to the office, you spend hours counting collections, updating ledgers, verifying figures, and preparing reports. Coins clink against wooden tables while clerks compare records by lamplight. Outside, ordinary citizens enjoy dinner with their families. Inside, the administrative machinery of the Roman Empire continues operating long after sunset. The empire's appetite for revenue never rests, which means neither do the men responsible for collecting it. Hours pass as columns of figures are reviewed again and again. Accuracy is essential. A single mistake discovered by a superior official can create problems lasting months. By the time you finally leave the office, darkness has settled across the city. The streets are quieter now. Most homes glow softly with lamplight. As you walk home through the cool evening air, exhaustion settles into your bones. Tomorrow will bring more records, more disputes, more inspections, and more complaints. Very few people will appreciate your efforts. Many will actively resent them. Yet despite the hostility, despite the endless paperwork, despite the impossible expectations placed upon you from both above and below, the work continues because Rome depends upon it. The empire may celebrate its emperors, generals, and politicians, but beneath the glory lies an enormous system held together by ordinary officials performing difficult tasks day after day. And as you disappear into the darkness of another Roman night, you cannot help but wonder whether anyone truly understands how lonely it feels to be the man everyone blames. Yet the empire cannot function without. The following morning begins much like every other, yet you quickly learn that today will be far more difficult than the day before. Before sunrise has fully illuminated the rooftops of Rome, a messenger arrives at the tax office carrying sealed instructions from provincial authorities. The document is brief but troubling. Revenue from several nearby districts has fallen below expectations, and officials higher in the administration want answers. They are not interested in excuses about poor harvests, difficult trade conditions, or local hardships. They want results. As you read the message, a familiar feeling settles in your stomach. Citizens already believe you demand too much. Now the government expects even more. Once again, you find yourself trapped between two groups whose interests rarely align. After organizing the day's records, you set out toward a prosperous district known for its workshops and merchants. The streets gradually fill with activity as the city awakens. Blacksmiths begin hammering metal. Potters arrange freshly finished goods. Bakers display warm loaves of bread. To an outsider, the neighborhood appears successful. To a tax collector, appearances mean very little. Prosperity on the surface does not always translate into honest reporting. Over the years, you have learned that some of the wealthiest citizens are often the most determined to avoid paying their full obligations. Upon arriving at the district, you begin reviewing workshop records. One bronze craftsman claims business has slowed dramatically. Yet several customers are waiting outside his shop before the doors have even opened. Another artisan insists his profits barely cover expenses despite recently expanding his workshop. Similar stories repeat throughout the morning. Individually, each explanation sounds plausible. Collectively, they begin sounding suspicious. The challenge lies in proving anything. Roman tax collection is not merely about demanding payment. It is about gathering evidence, identifying inconsistencies, and distinguishing genuine hardship from carefully crafted deception. Every conversation requires patience. Every document demands scrutiny. Every conclusion must be supported by facts. Hours pass beneath the growing heat of the day. By midday, you have uncovered several discrepancies significant enough to justify further investigation. Predictably, the discoveries are not well received. One merchant loudly accuses you of targeting honest citizens. Another claims the system itself is unfair. A crowd gradually gathers as voices rise. Situations like this are dangerous. Most people dislike tax collectors under normal circumstances. Public disputes can quickly transform resentment into hostility. You remain calm, speaking carefully while explaining the evidence. Eventually, the confrontation subsides, but the tension lingers. As you leave, dozens of eyes follow your movements. Some express anger, others express fear. Very few express understanding. During the afternoon, you travel beyond the city towards several farming communities responsible for supplying food to the surrounding region. The contrast between urban merchants and rural farmers is immediately obvious. In the city, people often hide wealth. In the countryside, hardship is usually visible. Fields stretch across the landscape beneath the summer sun. Farmers work tirelessly despite the heat. Life here is governed by weather, harvests, and circumstances often beyond human control. When you arrive at the first farm, the owner greets you respectfully but without enthusiasm. He already knows why you are there. Most likely, he has been worrying about this visit for weeks. Together, you review records concerning land, production, and previous payments. Unfortunately, the numbers are not encouraging. Recent harvests produced less than expected, leaving the family with fewer resources than normal. As the farmer explains his situation, his wife and children watch from nearby. Their expressions reveal the same concern visible on countless faces throughout your career. To them, taxes are not abstract financial obligations. They are the difference between comfort and uncertainty, between security and risk. Standing there beneath the afternoon sun, you once again experience one of the most difficult realities of your profession. The people facing you are not criminals. They are not enemies of Rome. They are ordinary citizens trying to survive. Yet your responsibility remains unchanged. The Empire expects payment. By late afternoon, you continue visiting additional farms and villages. Similar stories emerge everywhere. Poor weather, damaged crops, rising costs, reduced production. Some explanations are undoubtedly genuine. Others may be exaggerated. Determining which is which becomes increasingly difficult. Over time, you begin understanding why so many tax collectors develop reputations for cynicism. Constant exposure to conflicting claims gradually erodes certainty. Every person insists their circumstances are unique. Every citizen believes they deserve special consideration. If you accepted every request, revenue would disappear. If you rejected every request, entire communities would suffer. Somewhere between those extremes lies the correct path, though finding it is rarely easy. As evening approaches, you begin the journey back toward the city. The roads are quieter now. Farmers return home after long days of labor. Travelers hurry to reach shelter before darkness arrives. For a brief moment, the countryside feels peaceful. Yet even during this calm journey, your mind remains occupied by numbers, obligations, and decisions that still need to be made. The problems encountered throughout the day will not disappear overnight. Reports must be written. Assessments must be reviewed. Recommendations must be submitted to officials who expect clear answers to complicated questions. Returning to the tax office after sunset, you discover that several additional messages have arrived during your absence. One concerns a merchant suspected of concealing goods. Another requests updated revenue projections. A third reminds local officials that provincial authorities expect improved collections before the end of the season. Reading these notices, you cannot help feeling exhausted. Citizens believe tax collectors possess power. In reality, you often feel as trapped as the people from whom you collect money. Expectations flow downward from governors and administrators just as relentlessly as payments flow upward toward Rome. Long after darkness settles across the city, you remain seated beneath the glow of oil lamps completing reports. The office is nearly silent except for the occasional scratching of a stylus against wax. Outside, families enjoy their evenings. Inside, you continue documenting another day spent balancing the demands of an empire against the realities of ordinary life. When you finally leave for home, the streets are nearly empty. The moon hangs above Rome's rooftops while cool air replaces the heat of the day. Tomorrow will bring another series of inspections, disputes, and difficult decisions. More citizens will view you with suspicion. More officials will demand results. And once again, you will find yourself standing in the uncomfortable position occupied by every Roman tax collector, caught between a government that always wants more and a population that believes it already gives too much. Several weeks have passed since you began investigating declining revenues in the surrounding districts, and the pressure from above continues growing. Every report arriving from provincial officials carries the same message hidden beneath different words. Collect more. The empire's expenses never stop increasing. Legions stationed on distant frontiers require payment. Roads demand maintenance. Public buildings need repairs. Governors seek funds for new projects. Somewhere far away, powerful men discuss numbers on reports without ever seeing the people behind those numbers. Unfortunately, you see them every day. This morning, before the city has fully awakened, You are assigned a task that many tax collectors secretly dread. Rather than inspecting merchants or reviewing records inside the city, you must travel to a remote village where tax payments have fallen dramatically over the past year. According to official documents, the settlement should be prosperous. The surrounding land is fertile, trade routes pass nearby, and previous records suggest strong agricultural production. Yet recent collections tell a different story. Either the villagers are concealing wealth, or something has gone terribly wrong. By sunrise, you are already on the road. The city gradually disappears behind you as stone buildings give way to open countryside. For several hours, your horse follows dusty roads winding through farms, vineyards, and olive groves. The landscape appears peaceful. Farmers work fields beneath the morning sun. Shepherds guide animals across distant hills. Birds circle overhead. From a distance, everything seems normal. Yet experience has taught you that appearances rarely tell the entire story. When you finally arrive at the village shortly after midday, the situation becomes immediately clear. The official records were outdated. Whatever prosperity once existed here has faded. Several buildings show signs of neglect. Roofs need repair. Storage structures appear half empty. Even the villagers themselves look exhausted. Their clothing is worn. Their expressions reveal little enthusiasm for the arrival of a tax collector. A few children stop playing and stare as you enter. Older residents exchange uneasy glances. Nobody seems surprised by your presence. They have likely been expecting this visit for weeks. The village elder greets you politely, though the strain in his face is impossible to miss. Together, you walk through the settlement while discussing recent difficulties. Drought reduced crop yields. A livestock disease killed many animals. Several families left entirely after suffering financial losses. One problem followed another until even basic survival became difficult. As you listen, you find yourself struggling with a familiar question. How much of this is true, and how much is designed to influence your assessment? Years in this profession have made trust difficult. Some citizens exaggerate hardship to reduce obligations. Others genuinely suffer. Unfortunately, both groups often tell remarkably similar stories. Throughout the afternoon, you inspect fields, storage buildings, and records. The evidence gradually supports the villagers' claims. Grain reserves are lower than expected. Livestock numbers have declined significantly. Production records confirm reduced harvests. By every measurable standard, the village is experiencing genuine hardship. Under different circumstances, the findings might bring relief. Instead, they create a new problem. If the villagers truly cannot pay what Rome expects, how will you explain the shortfall to officials who care more about revenue than circumstances? The villagers, meanwhile, watch your investigation carefully. They know their future may depend upon your report. One farmer eventually approaches while you examine storage records. Unlike merchants in the city, he makes no attempt to negotiate or argue. Instead, he asks a simple question. What happens if they cannot pay? For a moment, neither of you speaks. The answer is uncomfortable. Additional debt, potential penalties, greater scrutiny from authorities. None of the possibilities are pleasant. Looking around at the struggling settlement, you realize the villagers already understand this. They do not need explanations. They need solutions. Unfortunately, solutions are rarely among the tools available to tax collectors. As evening approaches, the entire village seems quieter than before. People return home carrying the weight of uncertainty. Families gather around modest meals. Farmers discuss the future in low voices. The atmosphere feels heavy. Walking through the settlement, you cannot help noticing how differently these people view Rome compared to wealthy citizens living comfortably within the capital. To senators and merchants, the empire represents opportunity and stability. To villagers facing poor harvests, it often feels distant and demanding. Rome expects taxes regardless of weather, disease, or misfortune. The empire's needs continue whether local communities succeed or fail. Sitting outside the village before beginning your journey home, you spend several minutes reviewing your notes. The numbers tell one story, the people tell another. Both are true. The challenge lies in presenting that reality to officials who prefer simple answers. Eventually, darkness begins settling across the countryside. You mount your horse and start the long ride back toward the city. The road is quiet except for the sound of hooves against stone. Above, countless stars fill the night sky. For most travelers, the journey might feel peaceful. For you, it feels complicated. Tomorrow, you will submit a report explaining why collections have fallen. Some superiors will believe your conclusions. Others may suspect incompetence or leniency. Citizens blame tax collectors when taxes are high. Officials blame tax collectors when revenue is low. Once again, you find yourself trapped between forces beyond your control. By the time the lights of Rome appear in the distance, exhaustion has settled deeply into your body. Yet you already know that the difficult decisions are only beginning. The village's future now exists within a handful of reports and recommendations. Somewhere between compassion and duty, between reality and expectation, you must decide what to write. And as the great city grows larger ahead of you in the darkness, you cannot help wondering whether anyone in power truly understands the human cost hidden behind the numbers they demand. The report regarding the struggling village remains on your desk for several days, and during that time you discover an unfortunate truth about life as a Roman tax collector. Difficult decisions rarely stay isolated. One problem almost always leads to another. While provincial officials review your findings, new concerns emerge elsewhere. A major merchant operating near the city's river docks has suddenly reported dramatic losses despite evidence suggesting his business has never been more successful. The timing immediately attracts attention. Revenue from the surrounding countryside is already falling. The last thing authorities want is declining collections from one of the busiest commercial districts in the region. Before long, the responsibility for investigating the situation lands on your shoulders. Early the next morning, you make your way toward the docks. Unlike the quiet villages beyond the city, the harbor is alive with constant activity. Ships arrive from distant provinces carrying grain, wine, olive oil, textiles, spices, and countless other goods flowing through Rome's vast economic network. Sailors shout instructions. Laborers unload cargo. Merchants negotiate deals worth fortunes. The air smells of salt water, wood, sweat, and exotic products gathered from every corner of the empire. It is one of the wealthiest areas under your supervision, which also makes it one of the most difficult places to monitor honestly. Wealth creates opportunities, and opportunities often create temptation. The merchant at the center of your investigation owns several warehouses near the river. On paper, his recent reports describe declining business, damaged shipments, and reduced profits. Yet as you walk through the harbor, the claims seem increasingly difficult to believe. His workers appear busier than ever. Cargo continues arriving throughout the morning. Customers regularly enter and leave his properties. Nothing about the operation suggests financial hardship. Still, appearances alone prove nothing. You have learned to trust evidence rather than assumptions. Upon arriving at the merchant's main warehouse, you are greeted with exaggerated politeness. The merchant smiles constantly, offers refreshments, and praises your dedication to public service. Such friendliness immediately raises suspicion. Citizens rarely become enthusiastic when tax collectors appear unexpectedly. The warehouse itself is enormous. Stacks of goods reach nearly to the ceiling. Workers move constantly between storage areas carrying inventory from newly arrived shipments. At first glance, everything appears orderly. Yet as you begin comparing records against actual inventory, small inconsistencies emerge. Certain shipments listed by harbor officials never appear in the merchant's ledgers. Storage totals fail to match reported figures. Several valuable deliveries seem to have vanished entirely from official documentation. Individually, each discrepancy might be explained away as an error. Together, they form a pattern. As the investigation continues, the merchant grows noticeably less cheerful. His answers become shorter. His patience begins disappearing. Eventually, the pleasant conversation transforms into a tense exchange. He insists mistakes were made by clerks. He blames shipping companies. He blames warehouse managers. He blames almost everyone except himself. Yet the evidence continues growing. By midday, it becomes increasingly clear that substantial revenue has been deliberately concealed. Situations like this place you in an uncomfortable position. Ordinary citizens often assume tax collectors enjoy catching dishonest merchants. In reality, such discoveries frequently create more problems than they solve. Wealthy individuals possess influence. They maintain relationships with powerful officials. Exposing wrongdoing may be necessary, but it can also create enemies capable of causing trouble long after an investigation ends. Nevertheless, your responsibility remains unchanged. Facts are facts. Reports must reflect reality regardless of who becomes unhappy. Throughout the afternoon, workers continue moving through the docks while rumors of the investigation spread. Harbor districts thrive on information. By evening, countless people have already heard some version of the story. Sailors discuss it aboard ships. Laborers discuss it during meals. Merchants discuss it behind closed doors. Many seem pleased to see a wealthy trader facing scrutiny. Others quietly worry that additional inspections may soon follow. The merchant himself becomes increasingly desperate. Before you leave, he attempts one final conversation. His tone is different now, less confident, more calculating. Without directly saying so, he suggests that favorable treatment could benefit both of you. The implication is obvious. Bribery is hardly uncommon within the empire. Many officials accept such arrangements. Refusing them often surprises people. For a moment, the warehouse falls silent. The merchant studies your reaction carefully. You know accepting his offer would solve certain problems immediately. Additional wealth is always tempting. Nobody would likely discover the arrangement. Yet you also understand the consequences. Corruption rarely ends with a single decision. One compromise leads to another. Before long, an official no longer serves the law but serves personal interests instead. You reject the suggestion and leave. The merchant's expression tells you everything. You have not merely denied a bribe. You have created an enemy. By the time darkness settles over Rome, you are back in the tax office organizing evidence for an official report. Oil lamps flicker across stacks of documents while clerks finish their work nearby. Outside, the city enjoys another peaceful evening. Inside, You prepare information that may damage the career of one of the region's wealthiest merchants. The irony is impossible to ignore. Citizens often imagine tax collectors and wealthy businessmen working together against ordinary people. Yet tonight you find yourself fighting a battle against exactly the sort of influence many assume you serve. As you write the final sections of the report, exhaustion mixes with uncertainty. The evidence is strong. The conclusions are clear. Yet powerful people rarely accept consequences quietly. Tomorrow, the report will move upward through the administration. Officials will review your findings. Decisions will be made. Reputations may be ruined. And somewhere within the city, a wealthy merchant is likely already planning how to protect himself. Such realities are rarely mentioned when people describe the life of a Roman tax collector. They speak of collecting money and enforcing laws. They rarely mention the political dangers, the constant pressure, or the powerful enemies created by simply doing your job honestly. As you extinguish the final lamp and step into the cool night air, one thought remains in your mind. In Rome, collecting taxes is difficult. Collecting taxes from the rich can be dangerous. The investigation into the wealthy dock merchant spreads through Rome far faster than you expected. Within days, people across the city are discussing the case. Some view it as proof that even the rich must obey the law. Others believe the merchant is being unfairly targeted. Meanwhile, your own life becomes noticeably more complicated. For the first time in months, strangers recognize you in public. Merchants who once ignored your presence now watch you carefully. Some become unusually polite. Others become noticeably colder. The attention is uncomfortable. A tax collector's safest position is usually somewhere in the background, quietly performing his duties without attracting too much notice. Unfortunately, that luxury is no longer available. Early one morning, you are summoned to meet with several senior officials responsible for overseeing revenue collection throughout the region. The meeting takes place inside a government building overlooking one of Rome's busiest districts. Marble floors echo beneath your sandals as you walk through long corridors lined with statues and official records. Despite years of experience, gatherings like these still create tension. Citizens may fear tax collectors, but tax collectors often fear administrators. Merchants can complain. Farmers can argue. Yet senior officials possess the power to end careers with a single decision. When you enter the chamber, several men are already reviewing documents spread across a large wooden table. Among them sits a provincial administrator whose reputation for demanding results is known throughout the region. The conversation begins politely enough. Questions are asked regarding your recent investigations. Reports are reviewed. Evidence is discussed. Yet before long, the true purpose of the meeting becomes clear. Revenue throughout multiple districts continues falling below expectations. The empire needs more money. The officials want solutions. Unfortunately, there are very few solutions available. Taxes can only be collected from people who possess something to pay. Villages suffering from poor harvests cannot magically create wealth. Farmers struggling with drought cannot produce additional grain simply because administrators demand higher numbers. Merchants facing genuine losses cannot invent profits that do not exist. Yet such realities rarely satisfy people sitting behind desks far removed from daily life. Throughout the discussion, you find yourself repeatedly explaining circumstances beyond anyone's control. Weather, disease, trade disruptions, population decline in certain areas. Each explanation is accurate. Each explanation is also unwelcome. Administrators prefer certainty. Reality rarely provides it. By the end of the meeting, you leave with additional responsibilities and even greater pressure. Expectations have increased, but available resources have not. The burden has simply been pushed downward once again. The following weeks become some of the most exhausting of your career. You spend countless hours traveling between villages, marketplaces, farms, and workshops. Every district presents new challenges. In one community, local craftsmen argue that imported goods are destroying their profits. In another, merchants complain about increasing transportation costs. Farmers continue reporting disappointing harvests. Everywhere you go, people have reasons why paying taxes has become more difficult. Some reasons are legitimate. Others are convenient excuses. Distinguishing between the two becomes increasingly difficult as fatigue accumulates. One afternoon, while visiting a farming settlement several miles from the city, you witness something that remains with you for years afterward. A widow arrives carrying the final payment owed on her family's property. Her husband died months earlier, leaving her responsible for land, debts, and children. The payment itself is small compared to the sums handled by wealthy merchants, yet the sacrifice behind it is obvious. Every coin represents labor, uncertainty, and survival. As she places the money on the table, she apologizes for not being able to pay sooner. For a moment, you find yourself unable to respond. The empire views taxes as numbers. Standing before you is the human reality hidden behind those numbers. The experience forces an uncomfortable realization. Most citizens do not spend their days thinking about Rome's roads, armies, or public buildings. They think about feeding their families. They think about surviving difficult winters. They think about next year's harvest. Tax collectors often become symbols of distant government demands because they are the most visible representatives of a system ordinary people rarely feel they can influence. As summer gradually turns toward autumn, the pressure from above continues. More reports, more inspections, more expectations. Yet despite all the effort, one truth becomes increasingly obvious. There is a limit to what can be collected. No amount of determination can create wealth where none exists. Some officials understand this. Others refuse to accept it. For them, every shortfall must have a cause, and every cause must have someone responsible. Too often, that someone becomes the tax collector. One evening, after returning from another long journey, you remain alone in the office long after everyone else has gone home. Oil lamps cast soft shadows across stacks of records. Outside, Rome grows quieter as darkness settles over the city. You review months of reports spread across your desk. Thousands of names, thousands of payments, thousands of stories. Looking at the numbers, you suddenly realize something strange. The empire sees citizens as revenue sources and obligations. Citizens see the empire as demands and burdens. Yet you stand in the middle, seeing both sides. You understand why Rome needs taxes. You also understand why people resent paying them. It is a perspective shared by very few. Perhaps that is what makes the profession so lonely. No matter what decision you make, someone will be unhappy. Help citizens and officials complain. Satisfy officials and citizens suffer. There are no victories, only compromises. As midnight approaches, you finally close the ledgers and prepare to leave. The city outside is peaceful. Moonlight reflects from rooftops and marble buildings. For a brief moment, Rome appears calm and timeless. Yet you know better. Beneath the beauty lies an endless machine powered by labor, commerce, and money. Tomorrow, the machine will continue turning. More taxes will be collected. More disputes will arise. More difficult decisions will await. And once again, you will find yourself serving an empire that needs you, while representing an institution that few people will ever truly love. Autumn arrives, and with it comes the season many tax collectors fear most. Throughout the year, citizens can delay payments, negotiate deadlines, and promise future settlements. But eventually, accounts must be closed. Debts must be calculated. Reports must be finalized. For many people across the empire, this is merely another administrative period. For you, it is the most stressful time of the year. Every unresolved case suddenly becomes urgent. Every missing payment attracts attention. Every mistake hidden within months of paperwork threatens to emerge at the worst possible moment. The tax office becomes busier than ever before. Clerks work from sunrise until late into the night. Messengers arrive constantly carrying records from distant villages and market districts. Wax tablets pile higher on desks. Ledgers grow thicker. Conversations become shorter and more tense. Everyone understands the pressure. Provincial authorities expect complete accounting before winter arrives, and failure is not an acceptable outcome. Each morning begins with new lists of outstanding obligations. Some involve merchants who continue disputing assessments. Others concern farmers unable to pay after difficult harvests. Several involve debts that have remained unresolved for years. Looking across the endless records, you sometimes wonder how such a vast system manages to function at all. Yet somehow it does. It survives because countless ordinary officials spend their lives keeping it moving, even when the work feels impossible. One particularly difficult case soon demands your attention. A prosperous landowner living outside the city has accumulated significant tax debt while repeatedly avoiding direct communication. According to records, he possesses substantial property, employs dozens of workers, and owns fertile agricultural land. Yet payments continue arriving late or not at all. Previous collectors allowed delays. Administrators now want answers. Reluctantly, you prepare for another journey into the countryside. Upon arriving at the estate, the contrast with poorer villages is impossible to ignore. The property is enormous. Well-maintained buildings overlook productive farmland stretching toward the horizon. Workers move efficiently through fields and storage areas. Nothing about the estate suggests financial hardship. Yet when discussions begin, the owner immediately presents a familiar list of explanations. Unexpected expenses, poor market conditions, temporary difficulties, future improvements that will supposedly solve everything. You listen patiently, though experience has made you skeptical. Wealthy citizens often possess resources unavailable to ordinary people. When they fail to pay, inability is rarely the true cause. More often, it is a matter of priorities. The conversation lasts hours. Eventually, the reality becomes obvious. The landowner could pay. He simply prefers using his money elsewhere. Situations like this frustrate you more than genuine hardship ever could. Watching struggling farmers sacrifice necessities to meet obligations is painful. Watching wealthy citizens avoid obligations despite abundant resources feels insulting. By the end of the meeting, a payment schedule is established, though both of you understand the matter is far from finished. As you leave the estate, the owner remains polite, but the friendliness feels artificial. Another influential enemy has likely been added to your growing collection. The journey back to Rome provides plenty of time for reflection. The roads are quieter now than they were during summer. Cooler air moves across the countryside. Leaves begin changing color. Farmers prepare for winter while merchants focus on seasonal trade. Everywhere life continues moving forward. Yet your own days increasingly feel trapped inside cycles of reports, disputes, and obligations. Sometimes you struggle to remember the last time anyone thanked you for your work. Most citizens notice tax collectors only when something goes wrong. Success rarely attracts attention. Failure never goes unnoticed. Back in the city, another challenge awaits. Provincial officials have announced an inspection of local tax operations. Suddenly, every record must be reviewed again. Every figure must be verified. Every decision must be justified. The office transforms into a place of constant activity. Clerks hurry between tables carrying documents. Supervisors demand updates. Messengers come and go without pause. The atmosphere resembles a military campaign more than an administrative process. Everyone fears mistakes. Everyone fears scrutiny. You spend entire evenings checking reports long after darkness settles outside. One night, while reviewing years of records, you discover the name of a merchant whose taxes you collected when you first entered the profession. Curious, you continue reading. The records reveal decades of payments, property changes, family events, and business growth. Suddenly, the numbers become something more. They tell the story of a life. Then another name appears, and another. Farmers, craftsmen, traders, widows, laborers. Thousands of people reduced to entries within ledgers, yet each representing an entire human existence. For the first time in years, you stop seeing the records merely as obligations and accounts. They become reminders that every number in your office belongs to someone with fears, ambitions, struggles, and hopes. Perhaps that realization explains why the work feels so heavy. You are not managing coins. You are managing consequences. As winter approaches, the inspection finally arrives. Senior officials review documents for days. Questions are asked. Decisions are examined. Reports are scrutinized. The process is exhausting, but when it ends, your office survives with relatively few criticisms. Many clerks celebrate quietly. Others simply look relieved. For a brief moment, the pressure eases. Yet you know the feeling will not last. Another season will come. Another round of collections will begin. More citizens will struggle. More merchants will argue. More officials will demand results. Such is the rhythm of life as a Roman tax collector. Late that evening, after everyone else has left, you stand outside the office looking across the city. Oil lamps glow from distant windows. Somewhere families share meals. Somewhere merchants count profits. Somewhere farmers prepare for winter. Most of them will never think about the man responsible for recording their payments. Most will never understand the pressures you face. Yet despite the resentment, despite the criticism, despite the endless burden of expectations from every direction, you continue returning each morning. Not because the work is enjoyable, not because it brings admiration, but because someone must do it. And in the vast machinery of Rome, duty often belongs not to those who are loved, but to those willing to endure being disliked. Winter has finally arrived, and with it comes a different kind of challenge. The frantic harvest season is over. Many trading routes have slowed, and much of the countryside has settled into a quieter rhythm. For most citizens, winter is a time of endurance and preparation. For a Roman tax collector, however, it is often a season of consequences. The promises made throughout the year must now be measured against reality. Payments that were delayed must be addressed. Debts that were postponed can no longer be ignored. Excuses that once seemed reasonable begin losing their power. The empire expects its accounts to be settled before a new cycle begins, and that expectation creates tension everywhere you go. On a cold morning, you are assigned to review a growing list of unpaid obligations scattered across several districts. Some debts are small, others are significant. Together, they represent a problem large enough to attract attention from provincial authorities. As you leave the city, a gray sky hangs above the landscape. The roads are muddy from recent rains, and the journey feels slower than usual. Villages that seemed lively during summer now appear quiet. Smoke rises from chimneys. Doors remain closed against the cold. Fields lie dormant, waiting for spring. Yet beneath the peaceful appearance, financial anxiety remains very much alive. Your first visit is to a craftsman who has missed multiple payments. Years earlier, his workshop had been successful. Records show steady income, reliable collections, and growing business. Now the situation is very different. When you arrive, the workshop feels almost abandoned. Half-finished goods gather dust in corners. Tools sit unused. Orders have slowed. Competition from larger producers has damaged his livelihood. Sitting across from him, you listen as he describes the gradual decline of his business. There was no dramatic disaster, no single event that caused his troubles. Instead, small difficulties accumulated year after year until survival became a daily struggle. As he speaks, you realize how many citizens experience hardship not through catastrophe but through slow erosion. A little less profit one year, a few more expenses the next. Eventually, the difference becomes impossible to ignore. The conversation leaves you uneasy because there is no obvious solution. The debt remains real. The circumstances are real as well. You record your findings and continue onward, carrying the uncomfortable weight of another problem that cannot be neatly resolved. Throughout the following days, similar stories repeat themselves. A merchant whose ships were damaged during storms. A farmer still recovering from several poor harvests. A widow attempting to maintain land she inherited unexpectedly. None of these people fit the image often associated with tax disputes. They are not criminals. They are not rebels. They are simply ordinary citizens struggling within a system that rarely slows down for individual misfortune. The further you travel, the more you begin noticing a pattern. Rome's wealth is real, but so is its fragility. Great cities, busy ports, and successful estates create an illusion of endless prosperity. Yet beneath the surface, countless families live one difficult season away from serious trouble. One evening, while staying at a roadside inn, you find yourself sharing a meal with a retired legionary. The old soldier recognizes your profession almost immediately. Instead of hostility, however, he offers something unexpected: sympathy. During the conversation, he explains that soldiers and tax collectors share more similarities than most people realize. Neither profession is especially loved. Both spend years serving systems larger than themselves. Both are blamed for decisions they did not create. And both often sacrifice personal comfort in order to fulfill obligations others rarely appreciate. The observation remains in your thoughts long after the conversation ends. For years, you have viewed yourself as isolated between citizens and government. Perhaps you are not as alone as you believed. Returning to Rome several days later, you discover that political tensions are growing among local administrators. Revenue remains inconsistent. Expectations remain high. Some officials argue that collections should become stricter. Others warn that excessive pressure may create greater problems. Meetings stretch for hours as administrators debate numbers, policies, and projections. Sitting among them, you cannot help noticing how different these discussions sound compared to conversations in villages and workshops. Here, people speak about percentages, deficits, and targets. Outside these walls, citizens speak about food, survival, and family. Both perspectives are important, yet bridging the gap between them remains one of the most difficult aspects of your profession. As winter deepens, snow occasionally appears on distant hills beyond the city. Trade slows further. Roads become more difficult to travel. The tax office grows quieter than it was during harvest season, but the work never truly stops. Records continue arriving. Reports continue accumulating. Decisions continue waiting. One night, after everyone else has gone home, you remain alone reviewing old ledgers from previous decades. The names recorded within them tell silent stories. Some individuals appear year after year before suddenly disappearing. Others begin with modest holdings and gradually become prosperous. Entire families rise and fall within the pages. Looking through the records, you realize that you are witnessing history in a form few people ever see. Emperors may shape the empire, but ordinary citizens sustain it. Their labor fills these ledgers. Their successes and failures create the numbers administrators discuss. Their lives form the foundation beneath Rome's greatness. By the time you finally leave the office, the city is silent beneath a cold winter sky. Moonlight reflects from rooftops and marble monuments. Somewhere beyond the darkness, countless citizens sleep, unaware of the reports, calculations, and debates that shape their obligations. Tomorrow, many of them will wake and continue living their lives. Farmers will tend animals. Merchants will reopen shops. Craftsmen will return to workshops. And you will once again return to the tax office, carrying the responsibility of balancing an empire's demands against the realities of human lives. It is a burden few people understand and even fewer appreciate. Yet after all these years, you have begun accepting a simple truth. The miserable life of a Roman tax collector is not difficult because of the money. It is difficult because every coin collected represents a story, and every story carries a weight that numbers alone can never fully measure. Winter slowly begins giving way to spring, and for the first time in months, the city feels alive again. Merchants return to busy trade routes, farmers prepare their fields, and ships once delayed by rough weather begin arriving in greater numbers. For most citizens, the change in season brings hope. For you, it brings work. Lots of work. The quiet months are over. New records begin arriving daily. Trade activity increases. Property assessments must be updated. Collections that were postponed during winter suddenly become urgent. The tax office, which had seemed almost peaceful during the colder months, once again transforms into a place of constant movement and noise. Clerks hurry between tables carrying reports. Messengers arrive covered in road dust after traveling from distant settlements. Administrators demand projections for the coming year. Everywhere you look, people are preparing for another cycle of taxation. One morning, you receive orders to inspect several commercial operations outside Rome that have expanded rapidly during recent years. Such assignments are often viewed as positive. Growth usually means prosperity, and prosperity usually means revenue. Yet experience has taught you that success often creates its own complications. Wealth attracts ambition, and ambition sometimes encourages people to test the limits of honesty. The journey takes you through regions recovering from winter, Green fields stretch across the countryside. Farmers work tirelessly to prepare for planting. Villages seem more optimistic than they did only a few months earlier. Looking around, it is easy to understand why Rome has endured for so long. The empire possesses remarkable resilience. Difficult years come and go, yet people continue rebuilding, replanting, and moving forward. Still, resilience does not eliminate hardship. It merely allows people to survive it. Upon reaching the first settlement, you discover a growing network of warehouses supporting regional trade. The operation is impressive. Workers move goods efficiently. Records appear organized. Business seems strong. At first, everything appears straightforward. However, as inspections continue, familiar patterns begin emerging. Certain inventories do not match official reports. Some transactions seem strangely incomplete. Several shipments appear to have changed ownership multiple times before taxation could be properly assessed. None of the discrepancies are large enough to attract immediate attention individually. Together, however, they reveal a carefully designed strategy intended to reduce obligations without technically violating every rule. This is something many citizens fail to understand about taxation in Rome. The greatest challenges rarely involve obvious criminal activity. More often, they involve intelligent people searching for loopholes. Merchants, landowners, and traders constantly seek legal ways to minimize what they owe. Tax collectors spend enormous amounts of time identifying where clever accounting ends and dishonesty begins. During the following days, you meet with several business owners involved in the operation. Unlike struggling farmers or desperate craftsmen, these men are confident. They speak the language of contracts, agreements, and regulations. Every conversation feels like a contest. Questions are answered carefully. Explanations are crafted with precision. Nobody lies openly. Nobody needs to. Instead, information is arranged in ways that create favorable interpretations. By the end of each meeting, you often feel mentally exhausted. Physical labor may tire the body, but navigating endless technical arguments drains the mind. One evening, after completing another long day of inspections, you stay at a villa owned by a local administrator. During dinner, the conversation eventually turns toward taxation. Several guests express opinions about your profession. One believes tax collectors are too strict. Another argues they are too lenient. A wealthy merchant insists excessive taxation harms commerce. A retired officer argues strong revenue is essential for military security. Listening to them debate, you realize something amusing. Everyone has strong opinions about taxes. Almost nobody agrees on what fair taxation actually looks like. Citizens complain when taxes increase. Officials complain when collections decrease. Merchants complain about regulations. Governors complain about shortages. Somewhere between all these competing interests stands the tax collector, expected to satisfy everyone despite the impossibility of doing so. The following week, you finally return to Rome carrying several reports and recommendations. The city is busier than ever. Markets overflow with activity. Construction projects continue across multiple districts. New merchants arrive daily hoping to profit from expanding trade. To most observers, the empire appears prosperous. Yet your years in this profession have taught you to see beneath appearances. Prosperity creates opportunities, but it also creates expectations. The richer Rome becomes, the more revenue administrators expect. Success rarely reduces pressure. More often, it increases it. Back at the office, you spend days organizing findings from your journey. Every observation must be documented. Every recommendation must be justified. Every conclusion must withstand scrutiny from officials eager to challenge mistakes. As you work, a younger clerk approaches and asks how long you have been in the profession. For a moment, the question catches you off guard. The answer surprises even you. Decades have passed. Entire generations of merchants, farmers, and administrators have come and gone during your career. Empires often appear permanent from a distance, yet your records reveal constant change. Businesses rise and fail. Families prosper and decline. Officials gain power and lose it. Only the work itself remains. That evening, after everyone else has gone home, you sit alone reviewing the latest reports. Outside, spring rain begins falling softly across the city. The sound echoes faintly through open windows. Looking at the endless ledgers surrounding you, you realize something important. When you first entered this profession, you believed your job involved collecting money. Years later, you understand that money is only part of the story. Your true responsibility has always been understanding people, their ambitions, their fears, their struggles, their attempts to succeed within a system larger than themselves. Every record tells a human story disguised as numbers. And after spending so many years reading those stories, you have learned that the Roman Empire is not really built from marble, roads, or armies. It is built from millions of ordinary lives, each trying to find stability in an uncertain world. As the rain continues falling outside and another long day finally comes to an end, you quietly close the final ledger. Tomorrow will bring more reports, more disputes, and more responsibilities. Yet tonight, for a brief moment, you allow yourself to appreciate a simple truth that few citizens ever realize. Behind every tax collected by Rome stands a person, and behind every person stands a story far more complicated than any number written on a page. Years have passed since you first entered the world of Roman taxation, and the profession has changed you in ways you never expected. When you were younger, everything seemed simpler. Debts were numbers. Reports were documents. Citizens were names written on wax tablets. Experience has taught you otherwise. Now, every ledger feels heavier because you understand what hides behind the figures. Every unpaid tax tells a story. Every delayed payment reflects a struggle, a gamble, a failure, or sometimes a success carefully concealed. You have spent so many years examining the financial lives of others that it often feels as though you know the empire better than the people who govern it. Administrators see statistics. Senators see policies. Emperors see provinces. You see people. You see the merchant trying to rebuild after losing ships in a storm. You see the farmer praying for rain after months of drought. You see the widow struggling to maintain property she never expected to inherit. You see ambitious traders attempting to become wealthy and powerful landowners fighting to preserve fortunes accumulated over generations. Through endless records and inspections, you have witnessed countless lives unfold. One spring morning, a messenger arrives carrying orders that immediately attract attention throughout the office. Provincial authorities are conducting a comprehensive review of regional revenues stretching back many years. Every district will be examined. Every major collection office will be inspected. Every inconsistency will be investigated. The announcement creates immediate anxiety. Even the most careful officials understand that large systems inevitably contain mistakes. The question is never whether errors exist. The question is whether anyone important notices them. Over the following weeks, the tax office becomes a place of relentless activity. Old ledgers are removed from storage. Records covering decades are reviewed. Clerks compare figures from different periods. Dust-covered documents are opened for the first time in years. The process feels less like administration and more like archaeology. Entire chapters of local history emerge from forgotten records. Businesses long since vanished suddenly reappear in faded accounts. Families whose names once dominated local commerce now exist only as entries in aging ledgers. Looking through these records, you begin realizing how temporary everything truly is. Wealthy merchants who once seemed untouchable have disappeared. Powerful officials who inspired fear have been forgotten. Estates worth fortunes changed hands multiple times. Yet throughout all those years, the tax records remained. They survived wars, political changes, economic crises, and personal tragedies. In a strange way, the ledgers preserve a more honest version of history than monuments ever could. Monuments celebrate success. Records reveal reality. During the review, one particular discovery captures your attention. Deep within old files, you find records belonging to a merchant you investigated decades earlier when you were still young and inexperienced. At the time, he had been among the richest men in the region. His warehouses overflowed with goods. His ships dominated local trade routes. Many believed his wealth would secure his family's future forever. Yet the documents tell a different story. Several bad investments were followed by failed ventures. Trade disruptions caused losses. Debts accumulated. Within a generation, the fortune vanished. Reading through the sequence of reports feels strangely emotional. You remember meeting the man. You remember his confidence. You remember believing he represented stability and success. Now his entire legacy occupies only a handful of aging records. The discovery lingers in your thoughts long after the documents are returned to storage. The review process continues for months. Some offices perform well. Others reveal serious problems. Corruption is uncovered in a few districts. Incompetence is discovered in others. Yet one lesson appears repeatedly. The empire depends less upon extraordinary individuals than most people imagine. Rome survives because thousands of ordinary people perform difficult jobs every day. Clerks maintain records. Farmers grow food. Merchants move goods. Soldiers guard roads. Tax collectors keep the financial system functioning. None of these roles attract the glory associated with emperors or generals, yet without them the entire structure would collapse. One evening, after another exhausting day of reviewing decades of accounts, you climb a hill overlooking the city. The sun is setting behind Rome's rooftops, covering marble buildings in golden light. From this distance, the city appears magnificent. Temples rise above crowded neighborhoods. Smoke drifts gently into the evening sky. The sounds of daily life echo faintly from below. Watching the city, you find yourself reflecting on your own place within it. For most of your career, you viewed your profession as a burden. Citizens disliked you. Officials pressured you. Problems arrived faster than solutions. Yet now, after so many years, your perspective has begun changing. You realize that you have witnessed Rome from a viewpoint few others ever experience. You have seen prosperity and hardship, honesty and corruption, ambition and failure. You have watched ordinary people struggle, succeed, and adapt to circumstances beyond their control. Through their taxes, debts, records, and disputes, you have observed the true heartbeat of the empire. Not the version celebrated in triumphal processions or carved into monuments, but the real version built from ordinary lives. As darkness gradually settles across the city, another thought occurs to you. Someday, your own name will likely disappear just as countless others have. Future officials will inherit your responsibilities. New clerks will fill the office. New merchants will argue over assessments. New farmers will worry about harvests. The cycle will continue long after you are gone. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson your profession has taught you. No individual is truly permanent, not even within the greatest empire on earth. What endures is the system, the society, and the countless ordinary people whose efforts sustain it. Standing there above Rome as the last light fades from the horizon, you realize that your life has never really been about collecting taxes. It has been about witnessing humanity in all its complexity. The coins, ledgers, and reports were merely the tools. The people were always the real story. By now, age has begun leaving its mark upon you. The long journeys across dusty roads feel more exhausting than they once did. Hours spent leaning over ledgers leave your back aching. Faces that were once familiar have disappeared, replaced by younger merchants, younger officials, and younger clerks who know Rome only as it exists today. Many of them cannot imagine the empire any other way. They assume the roads will always be busy, the markets will always be full, and the government will always function as it does now. You know better. Decades spent inside the machinery of taxation have shown you how fragile prosperity can be. You have witnessed wealthy men lose fortunes, successful villages decline into poverty, and once important officials vanish from memory. Nothing remains unchanged forever, not even Rome. One morning, as you arrive at the office, you discover that a new group of clerks has been assigned to your department. Most are young, ambitious, and eager to impress their superiors. They remind you of yourself many years ago. Their questions are endless. How should records be organized? Which merchants are trustworthy? How can fraud be identified? Which reports deserve extra attention? At first, you answer patiently. Yet as the days pass, you begin realizing that what they seek is not merely technical knowledge. They want experience. They want to understand the parts of the profession that cannot be written into manuals or regulations. One afternoon, while reviewing assessments together, a young clerk asks a question that catches you by surprise. After years of collecting taxes, does the work become easier? For a moment, you consider the question carefully. The honest answer is no. The calculations become easier. The procedures become familiar. The paperwork becomes routine. But the human side never becomes easier. Every year brings new families facing hardship, new merchants attempting deception, new officials demanding impossible results, and new situations where no decision feels completely right. Experience teaches efficiency, but it does not remove responsibility. The clerk seems disappointed by the answer, though you suspect he understands it better than he admits. As spring turns towards summer, you find yourself spending less time traveling and more time supervising. Younger collectors now handle many of the journeys you once performed personally. They visit villages, inspect markets, and investigate disputes while you review reports from the office. At first, the change feels strange. For years, the roads had been a regular part of your life. You knew the villages, the inns, the merchants, and the farmers. Now much of that world reaches you only through written accounts. Yet there is also a certain satisfaction in watching younger officials learn. Occasionally they return frustrated after difficult inspections, complaining about dishonest merchants or unreasonable citizens. Listening to them, you often smile quietly because you recognize the same frustrations you carried decades earlier. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. One evening, a particularly thoughtful report arrives from a young collector recently assigned to a rural district. The document contains detailed observations about local conditions, harvest forecasts, and community concerns. More importantly, it demonstrates something many officials never develop: understanding. The collector has looked beyond the numbers and attempted to understand the people behind them. Reading the report, you feel a sense of pride that surprises you. Perhaps the profession has changed you more than you realized. Years ago, you might have focused entirely on revenue. Now you find yourself valuing wisdom more than collections. Revenue keeps the empire functioning, but understanding keeps it fair. Without that balance, taxation becomes little more than extraction. During the following months, another realization slowly emerges. Your name has become known within administrative circles. Younger officials seek your advice. Senior administrators trust your judgment. Merchants who once viewed you as an inexperienced collector now speak with a certain respect, even if they still dislike paying taxes. The change feels strange because it happened gradually. One day you were the young official learning from others. Now you are the veteran others learn from. Time has transformed you without asking permission. Late one night, after everyone else has gone home, you remain alone in the office reviewing old records. Shelves surrounding you contain decades of history preserved in wax, ink, and parchment. The room is silent except for the occasional crackle of an oil lamp. As you examine the ledgers, you notice how many names have come and gone throughout your career. Thousands of citizens passed through these records. Some became wealthy, some became poor, some disappeared entirely. Yet in many cases you remember them. The stubborn merchant who argued over every assessment. The widow who struggled to save her farm. The farmer who survived 3 terrible harvests. The ambitious trader who eventually built a fortune. Their stories remain with you long after the numbers themselves have faded. It occurs to you that this may be the true legacy of your profession. Not the taxes collected, not the reports completed, not the revenue delivered to Rome. The real legacy is witnessing lives. Few people have observed such a broad cross-section of society. Through your work, you have seen the empire from the ground level where ordinary people actually live. Emperors view Rome from palaces. Generals view it from battlefields. Tax collectors view it from marketplaces, farms, workshops, docks, and villages. You have spent a lifetime watching the empire function one citizen at a time. As midnight approaches, you finally close the final ledger and extinguish the lamp. Stepping outside into the warm summer air, you look across the sleeping city. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, merchants dream of profits, farmers hope for good weather, and officials prepare tomorrow's reports. The empire continues moving forward exactly as it always has. For the first time in many years, however, you no longer feel trapped within the system. Instead, you feel connected to it. You understand its flaws better than most people. You understand its strengths as well. And as you begin the walk home through quiet Roman streets, you realize that the miserable life of a Roman tax collector has given you something unexpected in return. A deeper understanding of people than wealth, status, or power could ever provide. The years continue passing, and although you remain respected within the administration, you increasingly feel the weight of time. Younger officials now handle most of the responsibilities that once consumed your days. They travel the roads, inspect markets, negotiate disputes, and prepare reports. You still oversee important matters, but your role has gradually shifted from collector to advisor. At first, the change felt uncomfortable. For decades, your identity had been tied to movement, investigation, and constant responsibility. Now, much of your work involves reviewing decisions made by others. Yet, as the months pass, you begin appreciating a perspective that only age can provide. Distance reveals patterns that are impossible to see when one is constantly occupied with daily problems. Looking back across your career, you realize that most citizens misunderstand the nature of taxation entirely. They believe it is about money. Administrators believe it is about revenue. Politicians believe it is about power. In truth, it is about trust. Every functioning government depends upon a fragile agreement between authority and ordinary people. Citizens pay because they believe the system provides stability, security, and order. The moment that belief weakens, collections become more difficult, resentment grows, and the relationship begins to fracture. You have witnessed this reality countless times throughout your life. Villages willingly contributed during prosperous years because they believed Rome protected them. Merchants accepted obligations when trade routes remained safe and predictable. Even struggling citizens often tolerated burdens they disliked because they trusted the larger system. Yet whenever that trust weakened, problems quickly followed. The lesson seems obvious now, though it took decades to fully understand. One summer afternoon, you are invited to attend a gathering of local administrators discussing future reforms. The room is filled with ambitious men eager to improve efficiency, increase revenue, and strengthen oversight. They debate procedures, regulations, and collection methods for hours. Listening quietly from the edge of the chamber, you notice something familiar. Nearly everyone is focused on numbers. Very few mention people. Eventually, one official asks your opinion. The room falls silent. Many of those present know your reputation. Some expect a complicated explanation. Others expect praise for their proposals. Instead, you offer a simple observation. The empire can survive low revenue for a year, cannot survive losing the trust of its citizens. For a moment, nobody responds. Then the discussion resumes. Yet several younger administrators continue thinking about your words long after the meeting ends. You know, because some of them later seek you out privately. They ask questions about villages, merchants, and ordinary families. They want to understand the realities hidden behind official reports. In those conversations, you recognize something encouraging. The next generation may not repeat every mistake made by the last. As autumn approaches, you begin sorting through personal records accumulated during your career. Old reports, notes, correspondence, and observations fill several storage chests. Many documents have little practical value now, yet each carries memories. One report reminds you of a drought that nearly devastated an entire district. Another recalls a merchant whose fortune collapsed after years of success. A faded note references a village that struggled so severely you feared it might disappear entirely. Years later, that same village became prosperous once again. The records reveal something remarkable. People are far more resilient than governments often realize. Again and again, citizens endured difficulties that seemed overwhelming at the time. They adapted, rebuilt, and continued moving forward. The empire often takes credit for stability, but much of that stability comes from ordinary individuals refusing to give up. One evening, while organizing these documents, you discover records from your earliest years as a collector. The handwriting looks unfamiliar because it belongs to a younger version of yourself. Reading the old reports feels almost like meeting a stranger. The younger man sounds confident, impatient, and certain about many things. He viewed problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. He believed rules could answer most questions. Experience eventually taught him otherwise. Real life rarely fits neatly into regulations. Human beings are complicated. Circumstances matter. Context matters. Compassion matters. The discovery leaves you smiling quietly beneath the lamplight. Age has taken some of your strength, but it has also given perspective. Looking around the office, you realize many of the younger clerks now see you the same way you once viewed older officials. They assume you possess answers. The truth is far simpler. You possess questions refined by experience. As winter approaches once again, your visits to the office become less frequent. Others now manage most daily operations. The system functions without your constant involvement, just as it eventually functions without everyone. At first, that realization feels strange. For years, it seemed impossible to imagine the office operating without your presence. Now it continues smoothly whether you are there or not. Rather than feeling disappointed, you find the thought comforting. It means the work mattered. Systems survive because knowledge passes from one generation to the next. On a cold evening near the end of the year, you stand overlooking Rome as countless lights flicker across the city below. Somewhere within those streets are merchants, farmers, laborers, craftsmen, widows, traders, soldiers, and officials whose lives continue shaping the empire's future. Most of them do not know your name. Most never will. Yet you have spent a lifetime observing their struggles and successes. You have watched ordinary people carry the weight of an extraordinary civilization. And as you look across the rooftops illuminated beneath the night sky, you finally understand something that escaped you for many years. The miserable life of a Roman tax collector was never truly about taxes. It was about people. The coins, ledgers, and reports were merely windows into human lives. Through them, you witnessed ambition, greed, kindness, resilience, fear, hope, and perseverance. You witnessed Rome not as emperors saw it, but as ordinary citizens lived it. And perhaps that perspective was worth every difficult day. As the final years of your career unfold, you find yourself spending more time reflecting than collecting. The roads you once traveled endlessly are now walked by younger officials. The marketplaces where merchants once argued with you continue buzzing with activity. Villages still worry about harvests. Traders still chase profits. Administrators still demand reports. Rome continues moving forward exactly as it always has, seemingly unaware that one of its oldest tax collectors is quietly approaching the end of his service. There is something strangely comforting about that realization. For much of your life, the work felt urgent. Every dispute seemed important. Every missing payment felt significant. Every report demanded immediate attention. Yet standing here now, after decades spent inside the machinery of the empire, you understand that history moves differently than people imagine. Empires are not built by famous men alone. They are built by countless ordinary individuals performing ordinary duties year after year. Farmers planting fields, merchants loading ships, laborers repairing roads, clerks maintaining records, and yes, even tax collectors ensuring that the vast system continues functioning. One afternoon, while walking through a market you have visited hundreds of times, you notice something unusual. Nobody pays much attention to you anymore. Years ago, your arrival would have caused nervous glances and whispered conversations. Merchants would have straightened their records. Citizens would have wondered what business brought you there. Today, people simply continue with their lives. At first, the realization feels strange. Then you understand its meaning. You are no longer seen as an individual. You have become part of the city's background, one small piece of a system so familiar that most people barely notice it. Oddly enough, you find peace in that thought. Not every life needs to be remembered in marble. Not every contribution requires celebration. Sometimes simply helping something endure is enough. In the months that follow, you gradually withdraw from active duties. Younger officials now seek your advice rather than your labor. They ask about difficult cases, dishonest merchants, struggling villages, and political pressures. You answer as honestly as you can. Yet the lessons you share rarely concern numbers. Numbers change. Policies change. Administrators change. Human nature remains remarkably consistent. You tell them that people are rarely as simple as reports suggest. That prosperity can disappear faster than anyone expects. That hardship often hides behind polite smiles. That fairness matters more than efficiency when dealing with ordinary lives. Most importantly, you tell them to remember that every tax recorded in a ledger belongs to a real person. Behind every payment stands a family, a farm, a workshop, a business, a dream, or a struggle. Forget that, and the work loses its purpose. One evening, near the end of winter, you open the oldest ledger you still possess. The pages are worn from age. Ink has faded. Some entries are barely readable. Yet as you turn each page, memories return. The farmer who survived years of drought. The merchant who built a fortune and lost it. The widow who paid her debts coin by coin despite overwhelming hardship. The ambitious trader who crossed the sea chasing opportunity. The stubborn landowner who spent years avoiding his obligations. Thousands of lives passed through your records. Most of those people are gone now. Some succeeded beyond imagination. Others disappeared into history without recognition. Yet for brief moments, their stories crossed yours. Looking through the ledger, you realize something profound. Throughout your career, you believed you were recording taxes. In reality, you were recording lives. The numbers were only the surface. Beneath them existed fear, hope, ambition, resilience, failure, love, sacrifice, and determination. The true history of Rome was never hidden inside palaces or temples. It existed within ordinary people struggling to build meaningful lives beneath the shadow of a great empire. As spring finally returns and warmer air drifts through the city once more, you take one last walk through Rome. The streets are as busy as ever. Children laugh in crowded squares. Merchants advertise their goods. Laborers repair buildings. Sailors unload cargo from distant provinces. Everywhere you look, life continues. The empire feels enormous and eternal. Yet, after a lifetime spent observing its citizens, you know the truth. Rome's greatest strength was never its armies, its roads, or its emperors. Its greatest strength was its people. Millions of ordinary individuals waking each morning and doing what needed to be done. You stop for a moment and look across the city. The sun hangs low above the rooftops, casting golden light across marble buildings and crowded streets. It is a beautiful sight, perhaps the same sight countless others have admired before you and countless others will admire long after you are gone. And as you stand there watching the city you served for so many years, a final realization settles quietly in your mind. The miserable life of a Roman tax collector was never truly miserable at all. Difficult, certainly. Frustrating, often. Thankless, almost always. But miserable? No, because through this profession, you witnessed something few people ever see. You witnessed an empire not from the perspective of power, but from the perspective of humanity. You saw people at their best and worst. You saw them endure hardship, celebrate success, recover from failure, and continue moving forward despite uncertainty. You learned that history is not made only by emperors and generals. It is made by ordinary people whose names are rarely remembered. And in the end, that may be the most valuable lesson Rome ever taught you. As the evening sun slowly disappears beyond the horizon and the city glows beneath the fading light, you turn away and begin walking home. Behind you, Rome continues living, breathing, and changing as it always will. Ahead of you lies a quieter future. Yet for the first time in many years, you feel completely at peace. The ledgers are finished. The reports are complete. The journey is over. And somewhere within the endless story of Rome, your own small chapter has finally reached its end.